The board learned that efficiency has a limit. When you strip a game down to pure market and pure merit, the pieces burn out. They become brittle, and brittle pieces break unexpectedly. To prevent shattering, the board allowed a new variable: proximity. Pieces called it connection, loyalty, family, but the board called it stabilization. Because the strange thing about survival is how quickly pieces seek mirrors. Rooks, born in adjacent corners, looked across the back row and found a shared language with bishops. They spent lifetimes guarding the same flanks, watching the same horizons. Over time, they stopped defending the king. They started to defend each other. Pawns, packed tightly in the trenches, huddled together against the cold of the open squares. They formed families out of friction. Shared trauma became a substitute for blood. And the board, patient as always, realized that pieces who love each other are much easier to manage than pieces who only love themselves. Because love introduces a new kind of leverage. If the board decides a queen must be removed, it hesitates, not because it fears her power, but because it fears the king's paralysis. A king mourning a queen is a king who refuses to move. A system that disrupts its own core relationship slows down, so the strategy shifted. When the structure required a sacrifice to clear space, it stopped looking at merit. It looked at alignment. It bypassed the underperforming rook, who was best friends with the bishop. It bypassed the mediocre pawn, who belonged to a vital cluster. Instead, the board chose the knight. The hard-working, high-achieving knight who moved brilliantly, but always stood alone. Because a knight has no coordinates, no deep roots, no clique to riot when they disappear. It is always safer for a system to sacrifice a high performer with no connections than a low performer with a family. The board didn't eliminate relationships, it weaponized them. It turned connection into insurance and isolation into a target. Pieces began to realize that skills mattered less than belonging. It wasn't about how well you moved, but who you stood next to when the floor started shaking. Pawns stopped practicing their advance. They practiced their compliance, ensuring they never stood too far from the group. Bishops stopped looking for truth. They looked for consensus. Pieces courted loyalty. The board, looking at the frozen, unbreakable clusters, called it insulation.